Liberal host mocks Elon's space dreams. Launch results leave him speechless. Jake Miller kicked off his expensive Italian shoes under his desk, a habit that drove his assistant Nancy crazy. But tonight, he couldn't care less about proper office etiquette. His show was about to start in 40 minutes, and he could already feel that familiar electricity in his veins. "Nancy!" he shouted, knowing she was probably already heading his way. "Where's that research file on Musk?" The door opened, and Nancy walked in, her gray hair perfectly styled as always. She'd been in television longer than Jake had been alive, and it showed in her unfazed expression. "Already on your tablet, Jake, like it has been for the past hour." Right. He grabbed his tablet, scrolling through the material. Did you see his latest tweet? Something about revolutionizing space travel again. Guy never stops, does he? Nancy adjusted her reading glasses. Maybe he's onto something this time. My grandson Tommy can't stop talking about onto something. Jake laughed, cutting her off. Nancy. How long have you been in this business? It's all smoke and mirrors. These billionaires, they're all the same. Big promises, bigger egos, and somehow always needing more money from investors. The makeup artist, Maria, walked in with her kit. 5 minutes till makeup, Mr. Miller. Make it 3. I want to review these notes one more time. Jake waved her off, his eyes glued to the screen. Look at this. He's promising Mars colonies by 2026. Mars! We can't even fix the subway system, but sure, let's build condos on Mars. Maria started unpacking her kit anyway, used to Jake's timing. Games. He always said 5 more minutes, then complained about being rushed. Your ratings have been slipping in the 18 to 25 demographic, Nancy reminded him, checking her clipboard. The network's been asking for more tech coverage. Jake snorted. Oh, they'll get their tech coverage tonight. Pass me that coffee, will you? Nancy handed him his lukewarm coffee, which he gulped down despite her disapproving look. Just remember, what happened with the cryptocurrency segment? Some topics have passionate followers. That's exactly what we want. Jake spread his arms wide, nearly knocking over Maria's powder brush. Passion means engagement. Engagement means ratings. Besides, that crypto segment got us trending for 3 days straight. It also got you death threats, Nancy muttered. Death threats are just angry tweets from guys living in their mother's basements. Jake dismissed her concern with a wave. Now, where's tonight's opening monologue? You said you wanted to improvise. Did I? Perfect. Those are always better anyway. Jake finally sat still enough for Maria to start working on his face. Hey, can you make me look extra serious tonight? I'm thinking concerned citizen, you know? Worried about the future of science and all that. Maria nodded silently, having learned long ago that engaging with Jake before a show only encouraged his nervous energy. The door burst open again, and this time it was Danny, Jake's head writer, looking frazzled as usual. Jake, have you seen the latest? Musk just posted another tweet. Something about a major announcement tonight. Tonight? Jake sat up straighter, nearly ruining Maria's contour work. What time? Around when we go live. A slow grin spread across Jake's face. Oh, this is perfect. This is absolutely perfect. Nancy, get the control room to set up a live feed. I want to be ready to cut to his announcement the moment it happens. Jake, Nancy warned, maybe we should stick to the planned segments. The network wants ratings? They'll get ratings. Danny, start working on some reaction jokes. You know, the usual stuff. Ego, wealth, daddy's emerald mine. But keep it punchy. I want to really nail him tonight. Danny scribbled in his notebook. What about the Mars angle? Oh, we're definitely hitting that. Hard. Jake turned to the mirror, examining Maria's work. How many times has he promised Mars now? 4. 5. Let's get a supercut ready. The studio buzzed with pre-show energy. Interns rushed back and forth with papers nobody would read. The floor manager was running cable checks. Through the makeup room's open door, Jake could hear the audience being seated. 10 minutes! Someone shouted from the hallway. Jake stood up, straightening his tie. Nancy, get me the latest viewer numbers for Musk's other announcements. Danny, I want at least 3 solid Mars jokes before we go live. Maria, actually, the face looks perfect. Good job. Mr. Miller, a young intern, stuck his head in the door. Your daughter's on the phone. She says it's important. Tell Sarah I'll call her back after the show. Jake was already walking toward the studio, his energy building with each step. Unless it's actually important? She said something about a science project? Definitely after the show then. Jake clapped his hands together. All right, people. Let's make television. The studio lights were bright as always, but tonight they felt especially energizing. Jake took his place behind his desk, adjusting his tie one last time. The same desk he'd started with 5 years ago, when his show was just another late night blip. Now, the Jake Miller Hour was competing with the big boys, and tonight felt like one of those nights that could push them over the top. How's the audience looking? He asked his floor director. Hot and ready. We've got some SpaceX fans in the crowd too. Perfect. They always make the best reaction shots. Jake took a sip of water, then remembered something. Oh, and make sure we get plenty of crowd shots during the Mars bits. I want to see those SpaceX fans squirm. Nancy appeared at his side one last time, handing him a fresh set of notes. Final numbers from the last Musk announcement. 12 million viewers across all platforms. We'll beat that. Jake didn't even look at the notes. Tonight feels different. Special. That's what worries me, Nancy muttered, but she was already walking off stage. The floor director started the countdown. Live in 5, 4. Jake took a deep breath, feeling the familiar transformation begin. On camera, he wasn't just Jake Miller, divorced dad with a mortgage. He was Jake Miller, voice of reason, defender of common sense, slayer of billionaire egos. His smile widened. 3, 2, the opening music hit, and the studio audience erupted in applause. Jake's face lit up with his signature grin, the one that had launched 1,000 memes. Good evening, America. His voice boomed through the studio. Boy, do we have a show for you tonight. You know, I was sitting in my office today, thinking about all the problems in the world. Climate change, poverty, inequality. You know, the usual Tuesday stuff. The audience chuckled. And then I thought, you know what would solve all this? Mars colonies. The laughter grew louder. Jake was in his element now, riding the wave of audience energy. That's right, folks. Our favorite billionaire space cowboy is at it again. Thus, the man who brought you exploding cars and internet satellites that confuse birds is back with another amazing promise. But before we get to tonight's big announcement, let's take a little trip down memory lane, shall we? The screens behind Jake lit up with a montage of Musk's previous announcements, each one accompanied by Jake's sarcastic commentary. The audience was eating it up, each laugh bigger than the last. Hold on. Jake held up a hand, pressing his earpiece. I'm being told that the big announcement is about to happen. Should we cut to it? The audience cheered. I don't know, folks. Last time he announced something, my Tesla stock dropped so fast it broke the sound barrier. More laughter. Jake could feel it building. That perfect energy that only came on special nights. In the wings, he could see Nancy shaking her head, but he didn't care. Tonight was going to be epic. All right, America. Let's see what our favorite billionaire has cooked up this time. Live from SpaceX headquarters, here's Elon Musk. The screens switched to the live feed, and Jake settled back in his chair, ready to mock whatever came next. But as he watched the feed, something felt different. The staging, the confidence, the detailed presentations. For just a moment, A tiny flicker of doubt crossed his mind. Then he remembered who he was, what his audience expected. He pushed the doubt aside and let his smirk return. After all, he had a show to do. "Oh, this is going to be good," he whispered to himself as Musk took the stage. The audience held their breath, and Jake Miller prepared to do what he did best: tear it all down. Little did he know, this night would change everything. But for now, he was still the king of late-night mockery, and he had a billionaire in his sights. "Ladies and gentlemen," Musk's voice came through the speakers. "Today we're going to show you something that will change the future of humanity." Jake rolled his eyes dramatically, getting another laugh from the audience. But somewhere in the back of his mind, that tiny doubt lingered. What if, just this once, the billionaire was actually right? He pushed the thought away. He had jokes to tell, ratings to earn, and a reputation to maintain. Tomorrow, everyone would be talking about how Jake Miller had done it again, taken down another billionaire's ego. That's what mattered. That's what always mattered. Right? The stage lights felt hotter than usual as Musk's presentation continued. Jake kept his smirk plastered on his face, but his eyes darted to the audience. The SpaceX fans he'd noticed earlier weren't laughing at his reactions anymore. They were leaning forward, entranced by the screens. "Our new propulsion system," Musk continued, "has achieved efficiency levels that were thought impossible just 5 years ago." "Impossible is right," Jake quipped, but his joke fell flat. Even his reliable front-row laughers were focused on the presentation. Danny appeared at the edge of the stage, frantically scribbling new jokes and holding them up on cue cards. Jake ignored them. He'd built his career on instinct, on reading the room, on knowing exactly when to strike. But something felt off tonight. "Nancy," he whispered into his earpiece during a particularly technical part of the presentation. "Get me viewing numbers. How many people are watching?" 2 million and climbing," she replied. "Social media engagement is through the roof, but what?" "They're not here for us, Jake. They're here for him." Jake felt a bead of sweat roll down his neck. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He glanced at his tablet, at all the prepared jokes about failed launches and empty promises. None of them felt right anymore. "And now," Musk said, his voice carrying an undercurrent of excitement that even Jake couldn't deny, "let me show you what we've built." The screen switched to a massive hangar, where something stood under a huge black cover. Jake opened his own mouth, ready with a joke about dramatic reveals. But then he saw something that made him pause. In the corner of the screen, barely visible, was a group of engineers. They were crying. Actually crying. "What the hell?" Jake muttered. "Ladies and gentlemen," Musk continued, "this is Starship Mark II, and it's not a prototype. It's not a model. This one is ready to fly." The cover dropped. The studio audience gasped. Even Jake, despite years of professional cynicism, felt his jaw drop slightly. The spacecraft was unlike anything he'd seen before. It wasn't just big. It was beautiful. "We'll be conducting our first full test flight next week," Musk said, but Jake barely heard him. He was watching the engineers in the background, their faces showing a pride that couldn't be faked. "Mr. Miller?" The floor director was trying to get his attention. "We need a reaction shot." Jake realized he'd been silent for almost 30 seconds. An eternity in television time. He scrambled to recover. "Well, folks," he started, forcing a laugh, "I guess someone's been busy with their Lego set." A few scattered chuckles. Nothing more. In the wings, Nancy was making the cut signal. They still had 20 minutes of show to fill. "We'll be right back after these messages," Jake said, falling back on decades of television training. "Don't go anywhere, folks. The night's just getting started." The moment they cut to commercial, the studio erupted in chaos. "What the hell was that?" Danny rushed to his desk. You barely used any of the material. Get me new jokes, Jake snapped. Something about the cost. There's no way they built that thing on budget. Jake! Nancy's voice was firm. The network's on the line. They want to know if we should stay with the SpaceX feed when they come back from announcement. No! Jake stood up, pacing behind his desk. Absolutely not. We've got other segments planned. We've got... He trailed off, realizing he couldn't remember what else they had planned. For the first time in years, Jake Miller was rattled. 3 minutes! The floor director called out. Jake. Nancy said softly. Maybe we should... I know what I'm doing. He cut her off. I've been doing this longer than that guy's been launching rockets. Trust me. But as he straightened his tie and prepared for the next segment, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The comfortable world of easy mockery and guaranteed laughs felt like it was slipping away. Live in 5, 4. Jake plastered on his signature smile, but inside, his mind was racing. He had built his career on tearing down the dreams of billionaires. What would happen if those dreams actually started coming true? Welcome back, America. 3 months had passed since Musk's announcement, and Jake Miller was back to his usual self. The memory of that awkward night had faded, replaced by a string of successful shows and rising ratings. His mockery of SpaceX had become a regular segment, each delay or setback fuel for his comedic fire. Another beautiful day in the studio, Jake announced, strutting through the hallway. Nancy, tell me we've got something good tonight. Nancy looked up from her tablet, her expression unreadable. The network wants you to tone down the space content. They think it's getting repetitive. Repetitive? Jake scoffed, grabbing his morning coffee from an intern. Like SpaceX's excuses for delays aren't repetitive. How many times have they postponed? This so-called test flight now? 4. Danny chimed in, appearing with a stack of papers. But Jake, maybe we should... 4 times. Jake's voice echoed through the hallway. That's 4 nights of solid gold content. The audience loves it. Maria, the makeup artist, was waiting in his dressing room. Early today, Mr. Miller. Feel good about tonight's show. We're doing a whole bit about launch windows. Get it? Windows? Like the computer? Jake laughed at his own joke while settling into the makeup chair. Speaking of launches, Nancy said from the doorway, the Cape's showing some activity today. They're always showing activity. Probably another weather balloon. Jake closed his eyes as Maria worked. Did you see their latest tweet? Preparing for potential opportunities. What does that even mean? It means they're being cautious. Came a new voice. Jake opened his eyes to see Sarah, his daughter, standing in the doorway. Sarah? What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be in school? It's Saturday, Dad. Sarah rolled her eyes, a gesture that reminded Jake too much of himself. Mom said I could visit the studio today, remember? Right. Jake tried to remember when he'd agreed to this. Well, perfect timing. You can watch your old man do what he does best. You mean make fun of people trying to advance human civilization? The room went quiet. Even Maria's brushstrokes seemed to pause. Someone's been watching too many SpaceX promotional videos, Jake said, trying to keep his tone light. Listen, honey, when you've been in this business as long as I have, Dad, just because you don't understand something doesn't make it stupid. Sarah pulled out her phone. Look, they're actually live streaming from the Cape right now. Probably another tour of their gift shop. Jake chuckled, but he noticed Nancy, moving closer to look at Sarah's phone. The next few hours passed in the usual pre-show blur. Jake rehearsed his monologue, approved Danny's jokes, and tried to ignore the nagging feeling that Sarah's words had left in his stomach. 5 minutes to air. The floor director's voice carried through the studio. Jake settled behind his desk, adjusting his tie. Nancy, what's our opening story? You wanted to lead with the billionaire space race piece, the one about... She was cut off by a commotion offstage. Danny came running out, his face flushed with excitement or fear. Jake couldn't tell which. Jake, they're launching! SpaceX is launching right now! What? No, that's impossible. They haven't announced anything. Jake looked at his monitors. There's nothing on the wire. It's happening! Sarah's voice came from somewhere in the wings. Dad, you have to see this! 30 seconds! The floor director called. Jake felt his stomach tighten. Nancy, what do we do? For the first time in years, Nancy looked genuinely uncertain. It's your call, Jake. But whatever you're going to do, decide fast. The studio lights felt hotter than usual. Jake could hear the audience murmuring, probably checking their phones, seeing the news. 10 seconds. Switch to the feed, Jake heard himself say. As soon as we're live, switch to the launch feed. But your monologue, just do it. The opening music played. The lights came up. Jake's practiced smile appeared automatically. Good evening, America. We're changing things up tonight because... His voice caught as the monitor switched to the live feed from Cape Canaveral. Because... There it stood. The same rocket he'd mocked for 3 months. But this time, something was different. The launch pad was cleared. The warning sirens were blaring. This was real. Ladies and gentlemen, Jake managed. We're taking you live to Cape Canaveral, where it appears SpaceX is conducting an unannounced launch of their... The engines ignited. The sound, even through the video feed, was overwhelming. Jake fell silent, all his prepared jokes evaporating in the face of raw power. In the wings, Sarah pressed against Nancy, both of them transfixed. Danny had stopped writing, his joke pad hanging limply at his side. The entire studio held its breath. The rocket rose, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. No explosions, no failures, no last-minute aborts. Dad, Sarah whispered, but Jake couldn't respond. His eyes were locked on the screens. The rocket cleared the tower. The flames were brilliant against the darkening sky. In all his years of television, Jake had never felt so small, so utterly incapable of clever commentary. Someone in the audience started clapping, then another. Soon the whole studio was applauding, but not for Jake. For the first time in his career, he was just another spectator. The rocket punched through the clouds, leaving a perfect vapor trail in its wake. The studio speakers carried the mission, control commentary. Each milestone ticked off with professional precision. Max Q achieved. Nominal trajectory. First stage separation in 3, 2, 1. Jake watched as the rocket split, its first stage beginning its automated return to Earth, while the main vessel continued upward. Everything was working exactly as promised. Everything he'd mocked as impossible was happening right before his eyes. Holy shit, he whispered, forgetting he was live on air. Nobody seemed to notice. Nobody was watching him anymore. The first stage landed perfectly on the drone ship. The second stage achieved its intended orbit. Every single prediction, every technical specification, every ambitious claim had been proven right. For several minutes, nobody in the studio spoke. The only sound was the continued applause and the crisp mission control updates. Finally, Nancy's voice came through Jake's earpiece. Jake, we need you to say something. Anything. He opened his mouth. But for the first time in his career, Jake Miller had nothing to say. No jokes, no witty comments, no clever takedowns. The monitors showed the curve of the Earth behind the rocket's second stage. It was beautiful, terrifying, historic. Well, folks, Jake finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. I guess sometimes seeing is believing. In the wings, Sarah was crying. Danny was furiously crossing out every joke he'd written. Nancy just stood there, shaking her head in amazement. The rest of the show was a blur. Jake went through the motions, read his cue cards, hit his marks. But his mind kept returning to that moment when the rocket rose from the pad. The moment when all his clever words had meant nothing in the face of actual achievement. After the show, he sat alone in his dressing room, still in his suit, still trying to process what had happened. There was a knock at the door. Sarah poked her head in. "Dad, are you okay?" "I don't know, honey." Jake looked at his reflection in the mirror. "I honestly don't know." "For what it's worth," she said, "I think tonight was your best show ever." "Exactly," Sarah smiled. "Sometimes being quiet is braver than making jokes." Jake stared at his phone. His social media was exploding. Clips of his speechless reaction were already going viral, but not in the way he was used to. This time, he wasn't the one doing the mocking. "What do I do now?" he asked, more to himself than to Sarah. "Maybe," she suggested, "you could try something really crazy." "What's that?" "Telling the truth." Jake looked at his daughter, seeing her clearly for the first time in a long while. When had she gotten so wise? The truth. It seemed so simple when she said it. But the truth meant admitting he was wrong. The truth meant changing everything. As if reading his thoughts, Sarah added, "You know, Dad, the rocket wasn't the only thing that could change tonight." Jake nodded slowly, realizing that something fundamental had shifted. Not just in space technology or in his show, but in himself. The question was, what was he going to do about it? Jake stood up suddenly, startling Sarah. "Get Nancy in here, and Danny." "Dad, it's late. Everyone's probably—" "They're still here. Trust me." Jake straightened his tie, a nervous habit he'd never managed to break. Nobody's leaving after a show like that. Sure enough, when Sarah opened the door, both Nancy and Danny were hovering in the hallway, along with half the production staff. They'd been waiting, Jake realized. Waiting to see what he would do. "Come in, all of you." Jake gestured to his cramped dressing room. "We need to talk about tomorrow's show." Nancy entered first, her usual clipboard replaced by a tablet filled with social media reactions. "Jake, you're trending. The clips of your reaction." "I know." He cut her off. "I've seen them." "Danny, what's the writing team saying?" Danny shuffled his feet. "Honestly, they're split. Half want to double down, make jokes about how one success doesn't erase past failures. The other half, well, the other half what? They think we need to admit we were wrong." The room fell silent. In television, especially in late night, admitting you were wrong was almost unheard of. It wasn't just about ego. It was about credibility. About maintaining the persona that audiences had come to expect. "What are the network executives saying?" Jake asked Nancy. "They want you to spin it. Say you were playing devil's advocate all along. That your skepticism pushed innovation forward." Nancy's voice was flat. Professional. "They've already drafted a statement." Jake looked at his reflection again. The stage makeup was starting to run, showing the tired face beneath. "Sarah, what do you think?" His daughter, who had been quietly observing from the corner, straightened up. "I think you know what to do, Dad. You just don't want to do it." "Mr. Miller," Maria, the makeup artist, spoke up from the doorway. "If I may? My son watches your show every night. He believes everything you say." Everything. The weight of that statement hung in the air. Jake thought about all the young viewers, all the people who took his jokes as gospel, who formed their opinions based on his punchlines. "Danny," Jake said finally, "throw out everything we had planned for tomorrow. All of it. But we're going to tell the truth. The whole truth. About why we mocked SpaceX. About what we saw tonight. About everything." Nancy stepped forward. "Jake, think about this. Your brand, my brand." Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. My brand. Tonight was being struck speechless by reality. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Sarah was beaming. Danny was already scribbling new notes, but Nancy still looked concerned. "The network won't like it," she warned. "Probably not." Jake loosened his tie completely. "But for the first time in years, I don't care what they like. We saw history tonight. Real history. Not the kind we joke about, but the kind that changes everything." He turned to the small crowd in his dressing room. "Anyone who wants to help rewrite tomorrow's show, stay. Anyone who doesn't, I understand." Nobody moved. "Okay then." Jake took a deep breath. "Let's make real television for once." They worked through the night, fueled by coffee and the lingering adrenaline from the launch. Danny's writers crafted honest reflections instead of punchlines. The research team pulled clips of Jake's past mockery. Not for laughs, but for context. Around midnight, Sarah finally went home, but not before hugging her father tighter than she had in years. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she whispered. Jake watched her leave, then turned back to his team. They were all exhausted, but there was something else in their faces now, something that looked a lot like hope. "Nancy," he called out. "What's the latest from the Cape?" She checked her tablet. The rocket performed perfectly. Every system, every stage, exactly as they said it would. And our viewers? Social media's still exploding. Your speechless moment has been viewed 12 million times. She paused. "But it's not mocking, Jake. People are calling it genuine. Real. Real." The word echoed in Jake's mind. How long had it been since anything on his show had been truly real? As the night wore on and the new show took shape, Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The excitement of telling the truth, no matter the consequences. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow would be honest. And somewhere out there, a rocket had just proven that the impossible was possible. Maybe, Jake thought, it was time he did the same. The morning after the launch, Jake's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. He sat in his home office, still in his pajamas, watching clips of himself going viral. His speechless face was everywhere, set to music, turned into memes, shared millions of times. "Dad!" Sarah's voice came through the door. "Dad, are you in there?" Jake didn't answer. He was watching the launch footage again, his 20th time maybe, or 30th. He'd lost count. "Dad, I'm coming in." Sarah opened the door to find her father surrounded by empty coffee cups, his eyes red from lack of sleep. Multiple screens showed different angles of the launch, along with social media reactions and news coverage. "Oh, Dad." Sarah's voice was soft with concern. "Did you see this one?" Jake pointed to one of the screens. "They synced my reaction with the sound of silence. Pretty clever, actually." His laugh sounded hollow. "You haven't slept, have you?" "Sleep?" Jake ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Who can sleep? Look at this telemetry data. Look at these flight patterns. They did everything they said they would do. Everything." Sarah picked up one of the empty coffee cups. "The show doesn't start for 12 hours. You need rest." "Rest?" Jake finally turned to look at his daughter. "How can I rest when everything I've been saying, everything I've built my career on, has just been..." He gestured vaguely at the screens. "Been what, Dad?" "Been proven completely wrong." The words burst out of him. 3 years, Sarah. 3 years I've been mocking them, making jokes about failed launches, about impossible dreams, about billionaires, playing with rockets. And now they've succeeded." Sarah finished quietly. "Succeeded?" Jake laughed again, that same hollow sound. "They didn't just succeed. They revolutionized spaceflight. While I was making jokes about ego and vanity, they were actually doing it. Actually making history." He stood up, pacing the room. "You know what the worst part is? I knew. Deep down, I knew they might actually do it. But the jokes were easy. The mockery got ratings. And now..." "Dad, you're scaring me." Jake stopped pacing, seeing the genuine concern in his daughter's eyes. I'm sorry, honey. I don't know how to process this. Maybe you could start by taking a shower. Sarah wrinkled her nose. You smell like yesterday's coffee. Despite everything, Jake found himself chuckling. A real laugh this time. When did you get so wise? Must be all that science homework you never helped me with. The doorbell rang, making them both jump. Sarah went to check while Jake stared back at his screens. Dad, Sarah called. It's Nancy and Danny. Jake looked down at his pajamas. Tell them I'm not too late. Nancy's voice preceded her into the office. She stopped short when she saw him. Oh, Jake. Danny followed, carrying his ever-present notebook. Boss, we need to talk about tonight's show. The network's been calling non-stop. I bet they have. Jake slumped back into his chair. Let me guess. They want me to make it all a joke? Play it off like it's no big deal? Actually, Nancy consulted her tablet. They're terrified you're going to admit you were wrong. Their words. The Jake Miller brand is built on unwavering confidence. They want you to spin this as you playing devil's advocate all along. Devil's advocate? Jake's voice rose. I called them delusional. I said it was all smoke and mirrors. I made jokes about their engineers' credentials, which got us great ratings, Danny pointed out, then withered under Sarah's glare. Those engineers, Jake continued, pulling up a new video on one of his screens. Look at them. Look at their faces when it worked, when everything they'd been fighting for, everything I'd been mocking, actually happened. The screen showed the SpaceX control room erupting in celebration. Tears, hugs, pure joy radiating from every face. They did something impossible. Jake, whispered. Something beautiful. And I spent years trying to tear them down. Nancy stepped forward, her professional demeanor softening. Jake, you're not the only one who was skeptical. Every major network, but I was the loudest. Jake stood up again, his voice cracking. I made it personal. I made it about ego and wealth and everything except what it was really about, pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Sarah touched his arm. Dad, maybe this is an opportunity. An opportunity for what? To become a laughingstock? No, she said firmly. An opportunity to show that even Jake Miller can learn, can grow, can admit when he's wrong. The room fell silent. Danny had stopped writing. Nancy was watching Jake carefully. Even the constant buzz of his phone seemed to pause. The network will hate it, Nancy said finally. Let them. Jake straightened up. Sarah's right. This isn't about saving face or protecting my brand. This is about the truth. He turned to Danny. Throw out whatever you've written for tonight. All of it. What are we going to do instead? Jake looked at the screens one last time. The launch, the celebrations, his own speechless face. We're going to tell the truth. The whole truth. About how I got it wrong. About why I got it wrong. And about what it means to see something truly revolutionary. They might fire you, Nancy warned. Maybe. Jake managed a small smile. But at least I'll be able to look my daughter in the eye. Again. Sarah hugged him, not minding the coffee smell. I'm proud of you, Dad. Don't be proud yet. Jake hugged her back. I still have to actually do it. Mr. Miller? A new voice came from the doorway. It was Maria, the makeup artist holding her kit. Nancy called me, said you might need some help looking less catastrophic. Jake touched his unshaven face. Is it that bad? Let's just say. Maria set down her kit. We're going to need the heavy-duty concealer today. As Maria worked her magic and Danny started drafting a new script, Jake felt something he hadn't expected. Relief. The weight of maintaining his cynical persona, of always having to be the smartest skeptic in the room, was lifting. Nancy, he called out. What's the latest from SpaceX? They're releasing the full flight data today. Everything performed beyond expectations. They're already planning the next launch. Good. Jake nodded, careful not to disturb Maria's work. I want that data in the show. All of it. No jokes, no spin, just the truth. And your opening line? Danny asked, pen poised. Jake thought for a moment. How about, "Good evening, America. Tonight I need to admit something." Sarah smiled. Perfect. As the day wore on and preparations for the show continued, Jake felt something else unexpected. Excitement. Not the usual pre-show adrenaline, but something deeper. The excitement of finally, after all these years, telling the absolute truth. The question was, would America be ready to hear it? The studio felt different that evening. The usual pre-show buzz was replaced by a tense silence. Even the audience seemed to sense something was different. Their excited chatter was more subdued, punctuated by people checking their phones for more launch coverage. 5 minutes to air, the floor director called out. Jake sat at his desk, adjusting his tie for the 100th time. The makeup concealed his sleepless night, but nothing could hide the change in his demeanor. Last chance to change your mind, Nancy said quietly from the wings. Any word from the network? They've been calling non-stop. The executive producer is threatening to cut the feed if you go off script. Jake nodded. Let them. Sometimes the most important shows never make it to air. Dad. Sarah appeared beside Nancy. The SpaceX engineers are watching. They're doing a viewing party at Mission Control. How do you know that? Twitter. They're waiting to see what you'll say. Jake felt his heart racing. It was one thing to admit he was wrong to his regular audience. It was another to know that the very people he'd mocked were watching. Mr. Miller. Maria hurried over with her powder brush. You're looking a little pale. I'm fine, Jake assured her, though his hands were shaking. Just need to get through the next hour. Danny appeared with the final script. It's all there. The admission, the apology, the data. Are you sure about this? For the first time, in years, Jake said, I'm absolutely sure. 3 minutes. The studio lights came up. Jake could see his regular front row audience members, the ones who always laughed at his jokes. Would they understand what he was about to do? Jake? Nancy's voice came through his earpiece. The network president is on the line. He's ordering you to stick to the original format. Jake reached up and removed the earpiece, placing it carefully on his desk. In the wings, he saw Nancy smile and nod. 1 minute. Sarah gave him a thumbs up from offstage. Danny crossed himself, something Jake had never seen him do before. 30 seconds. Jake took a deep breath, looking down at the script. His eyes fell on the opening line. Good evening, America. Tonight I need to admit something. 10 seconds. The opening music began to play. The audience applauded on cue. Everything felt normal, routine, safe. But tonight would be anything but routine. Live in 5, 4. Jake thought of the engineers' faces during the launch, of their tears of joy, of their dedication that he'd mocked for so long. 3, 2. He thought of Sarah's pride when he'd decided to tell the truth, of the weight lifting from his shoulders. 1. The red light came on. All of America was watching. It was time for the truth. Good evening, Jake began, his voice steadier than he'd expected. Tonight, I need to admit something. In the wings, Sarah held her breath. Nancy gripped her tablet. Danny stopped writing for once. Last night, we all witnessed something extraordinary. And I don't just mean the SpaceX launch. Jake paused, feeling the weight of every word. We witnessed the moment when a cynical, arrogant television host realized just how wrong he'd been. The audience was silent. No laughter, no applause, just rapt attention. For 3 years, I've made a career out of mocking dreams. I've used my platform to tear down people who dared to reach for the impossible. I made you laugh at their ambitions, their setbacks, their determination. He gestured to the screens behind him, where clips of his past mockery began to play. Look at me there, so confident in my cynicism, so sure that nothing would ever change, so comfortable in my role as the voice of doubt. The clips continued, showing his harshest jokes, his most cutting remarks. Jake watched them unflinch. A week had passed since Jake's on-air confession. His inbox was flooded with messages, some supportive, others angry, most just surprised. He sat in his home office, scrolling through them mindlessly, when a new notification made his heart stop. From E. Musk. Subject: an invitation. Dad? Sarah's voice carried from downstairs. Are you still staring at that email? Jake quickly minimized the window as his daughter entered the room. I'm not staring. I'm contemplating. You've been contemplating for 2 hours. Sarah leaned against his desk. What does it actually say? Jake reopened the email, reading it aloud for the 10th time. Dear Mr. Miller, your recent broadcast showed something rare in today's media landscape. The courage to change your mind publicly. I would like to invite you to tour our facility and witness our next launch in person. No cameras, no crew. Just a conversation about the future. Best regards, Elon Musk. Well, Sarah's eyes were wide with excitement. You're going, right? Jake stood up, pacing the room. It's not that simple, honey. The network suspended you anyway. Sarah interrupted. What do you have to lose? She had a point. After his unscripted confession, the network had put his show on hiatus. Nancy said it was temporary, but Jake knew better. His phone rang. Speaking of Nancy, please tell me you've seen the email, she said without preamble. Hello to you too, Nancy. Jake, this is huge. The network executives are already calling. They want to negotiate your return, maybe do a whole special about... No, Jake's voice was firm. No cameras, no crew. That's what the email said, and that's how it should be. But Jake, Nancy, remember what I said about telling the truth? This isn't about ratings anymore. There was a long pause. You've really changed, haven't you? Maybe I'm just tired of pretending I haven't. After hanging up, Jake found Sarah still watching him expectantly. What? Are you going to reply to him? Jake sat back down at his computer. What would you say? Dad, stop deflecting. You know exactly what you want to say. You're just scared. I'm not scared. Jake protested, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm cautious. Since when? The question hung in the air. Since when had Jake Miller, the man who built his career on bold takedowns and fearless mockery, become cautious? His phone buzzed again. This time it was Danny. Boss, have you seen... Yes, Danny, I've seen the email. Everyone's seen the email. So what are you going to do? Jake looked at Sarah, who was making exaggerated typing motions at his keyboard. I'm going to tell the truth. He opened the email reply window and began to type. Dear Mr. Musk, thank you for your invitation. You're right. This shouldn't be about cameras or ratings. I would be honored to visit and learn more about your work. Regards, Jake Miller. That's it. Sarah peered at the screen. Kind of brief, isn't it? Sometimes the truth doesn't need many words. Jake hit send before he could change his mind. The response came almost immediately. Excellent. Tomorrow 9 a.m. A car will pick you up. Bring your daughter. I hear she's interested in engineering. E. Sarah squealed with delight. Jake felt his stomach tighten. How did he know about... Dad, I might have been tweeting about your show. And the launch. And science in general. Of course you were. Jake shook his head, smiling despite his nerves. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparations and phone calls. Nancy tried 3 more times to convince him to bring a camera crew, Danny offered to write some just-in-case jokes. Jake refused. Both. That night, he stood in front of his closet, wondering what one wears to meet the person they've mocked for years. Business casual, Sarah called from her room. The engineers don't trust suits. Since when are you an expert on engineer fashion? Since I started following them all on Twitter. Jake selected a simple button-down shirt and slacks. No tie, no armor of television formality. Sleep proved elusive. He kept thinking about all the jokes he'd made, all the mockery, all the times he'd dismissed genuine achievement for the sake of easy laughs. Morning came too quickly and too slowly at the same time. At 8:55 a.m., a sleek black car pulled up outside their house. Ready? Sarah asked, practically bouncing with excitement. No, Jake admitted. But that's probably a good thing. The driver opened the door for them. As they settled into the back seat, Jake noticed his hands were shaking. Dad? Sarah took his hand. It's going to be okay. How do you know? Because you're finally doing the right thing. And that's always okay. The car pulled away from their house. Jake watched his familiar neighborhood disappear, replaced by the unknown road ahead. Are you kidding? It was perfect. Tommy grinned. Every time we hit a problem, I'd play your clip. The whole team would be like, we can't let Jake Miller be right. Other engineers were gathering now. Instead of the hostility Jake had feared, he saw something that looked almost like appreciation? Your mockery was like fuel. One engineer explained. Every joke made us work harder. Though some jokes were pretty funny. Another admitted, the one about the rocket being powered by Musk's ego. I actually laughed at that. Sarah was beaming, watching her father navigate this unexpected reception. Jake felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. Would you like to see the launch prep? Amy asked, there's a launch today? Jake tried to keep his voice steady. Just a test fire. But Amy paused as her phone buzzed. Actually, change of plans. He's ready to see you now. The room suddenly felt very quiet. The engineers stepped back, creating a path to a door Jake hadn't noticed before. Dad. Sarah squeezed his hand. You've got this. Jake straightened his shirt, took a deep breath, and followed Amy to the door. She knocked once, then opened it. The office was surprisingly simple. A few models, some books, a desk covered in engineering drawings. And there, standing by a window overlooking the launch pad, was Elon Musk. Mr. Miller. He turned, a slight smile on his face. I believe you have some questions about Mars. Jake Miller, the man who always had a witty comeback, found himself speechless for the second time in a week. But this time, it felt right. Sometimes he realized, the best stories begin when you stop talking and start listening. Yes, he managed finally. Yes, I do.